So today's film is Easy Rider, released in 1969 but made in 1968. Uh, I'm going to have some introductory remarks, then talk about the plot, and then talk about the production, and then the post-production. So in general, in a typical late 60s way, Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper in Easy Rider are doomed righteous outlaws. Like Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway, the bank robbers in the youth hit movie Bonnie and Clyde 2 years before. So yes, Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper are drug dealers, but they're honest in their own way, and in their own way, they're protesters against the establishment. And so, naturally, they will be destroyed. Easy Rider emanated from the nation's dream life, in this case, the myth of wild, free cowboys, motorcycles taking the place of cowboy horses. And the first half of the movie is a modern Western, and it's intentional. These cowboy outlaw dream figures seem natural to us and interesting to us because they emerge from deep within American culture, shared fantasies that provide our national narrative. The title of this film, a film about myth, is Easy Rider, and it comes from Terry Southern, who wrote the script. An easy rider was the lover, but not the pimp, of a prostitute. In the film, it's clear who the lovers are, Wyatt and Billy, and it's clear who the prostitute is, America. Terry Southern was a cultural radical, the screenwriter of the shocking satire on the Strategic Air Command, Dr. Strangelove. But he was appalled at the drug-fueled chaos during Easy Rider's production and soon left. Yet the movie was a huge financial success. Made for only $400,000, it eventually brought in $60 million in gross box office receipts. The gross is the total receipts for paid seats, but half belongs to the exhibitor theaters. Nevertheless, the net to the producers was $30 million, a return of nearly 100 times the original investment. And in Hollywood, as I've said, follow the money. By 1968, over 50% of the movie audience were under 25, and they were flocking to radical, subversive, independent productions. Not only Bonnie and Clyde, but Easy Rider. Not only Monterey Pop, but The Graduate. Or the box office hit Wild in the Streets, a film in which a teenage rock star becomes president of the United States and sets up concentration camps for anyone over 30. Yes, that sounds absurd, but the political opinions of rock star Taylor Swift count for a lot in modern society. In the late 60s, thus, a pattern had emerged. Low-budget personal films that young audiences were flooding to. By contrast, 20th Century Fox's 1968 musical behemoth Hello, Dolly cost $26 million to make, 60 times the cost of the Easy Rider, and ended up far below the box office earnings of our $400,000 film. That's the revolution that was occurring in the late 60s. Okay, so now I'm going to discuss the plot, and I always like to go over the plot of a movie first, its main events. That way we're all on the same page during discussion, but I can't resist personal commentary. I never have been able to do that. So here is the basic story. Wyatt, Peter Fonda, and Billy, Dennis Hopper, are rootless motorcyclists. They smuggle a large cache of cocaine from Mexico into Los Angeles and sell it to a music tycoon. They are now rich. With the cash stuffed into a tube hidden in the fuel tank of Wyatt's chopper, they ride east from LA. Their goal is to reach New Orleans in time to participate in the Mardi Gras festival. Peter Fonda said he envisioned Easy Rider as a version of John Ford's great Western, The Searchers, which he saw when he was 16 in 1956. The vision of the two bikers as a version of the two searchers, and the searchers came to him full blown one night in June 1967 at the Montreal Expo, if people can remember that. Uh, that happened when he was very stoned. The impact of John Ford's The Searchers here is striking. Peter Fonda joined a whole row of sensitive teenagers, including Martin Scorsese and Steven Spielberg, who felt the emotional impact of Ford's great grim Western, John Wayne as a racist villain, when it first came out. So, in the climactic scene in Steven Spielberg's recent autobiographical film, The Fabelmans, the young, awestruck Spielberg meets with old John Ford in Ford's office at the studio and takes instruction on filmmaking from him, as actually happened with Spielberg. And the music in the background is music from The Searchers playing lovingly. I myself was 10 years old when I first saw The Searchers, an original widescreen VistaVision. It was an overwhelming experience. 50 years later, I wrote a book about the film. Peter Fonda's insight was that bikers are today's cowboys, with all that meant to the American myth of freedom. The names Fonda chose for his characters, Wyatt and Billy, were themselves legends of the Old West. Wyatt Earp, Billy the Kid. It was fully intentional. Like the two cowboys and the searchers, the two loners on motorcycles would go looking for the equivalent of the innocent child Debbie kidnapped by savages. But Debbie in Easy Rider is the old innocent America, and its kidnappers are capitalists and racists. Fonda was perfectly explicit about the parallel that he intended to draw. But you know, it's not only that Peter Fonda's character is named for Wyatt Earp, it's that Peter Fonda's own father, the great film star Henry Fonda, had famously played Wyatt Earp for John Ford in John Ford's classic Western, My Darling Clementine, 1946, great film. And Peter Fonda had seen his father's performance and knew it well. In fact, Peter Fonda's Wyatt retains or imitates the reserve of his father's portrayal of Wyatt Earp, a judgmental, self-righteous, and humorless person. That's actually the real real Henry Fonda, too. That's according to Jane Fonda. Wyatt is the opposite of his companion, the wild Billy. So the Wyatt of Easy Rider is not just the Western legend Wyatt Earp Redux, it's Peter Fonda's own father's version of the legend Redux in a grimmer America. But Peter Fonda disliked his cold, distant father and never played this Wyatt character again. He said it was too painful to do. So Peter Fonda's idea for Easy Rider was that Wyatt and Billy would ride across the US, surveying the state of the country, the hippies, the rednecks, the squares, the freedom, the paranoia, the bigotry. They'd be Alex de Tocqueville on choppers. Oh, about the choppers. There were actually four of them, two that you see at any point on the film, plus two in reserve, bought at auction, ironically, from the Los Angeles Police Department. All four were then modified to look the startling way they do by Ben Hardy, a black custom motorcycle builder, famous in Watts, but nowhere else. By the way, there are terms and concepts for all of this stuff that you have access to for the lecture. So had Ben Hardy, the motorcycle designer, been white, he might have become a national icon for the choppers he created for Easy Rider. As it is, the designer of the most famous motorcycles in Hollywood history remains mostly an unknown. And so, on their big California-style motorcycles, Wyatt and Billy go searching for America. And unfortunately for them, they find it. This helps explain why Wyatt is wearing a large American flag on the back of his leathers and an American flag helmet. It's totally mythical. Same with Wyatt's nickname, Captain America. Again, that is overtly myth. But the issue in the film is put by Jack Nicholson's character, who tells Wyatt and Billy, "This used to be a hell of a good country. I can't understand what's gone wrong with it." For the record, most of the bike riding scenes were shot at only 20 to 25 miles an hour, fast enough to make the riders not look like novices, which they were not, but slow enough to keep those beautiful American vistas behind the drivers from being simply a blur. It's an illusion. The illusion of high speed is just that, another movie technique. So in the mountains outside Flagstaff, Wyatt picks up a hippie hitchhiker. The hitchhiker invites them to visit his commune. On the way, they visit the dramatic landscape of John Ford's beloved Monument Valley at dusk to the sound of the band's famous mournful song, The Wait. Dennis Hopper says he intended this sequence and the music, the most beautiful and moving sequence in the film, as his own tribute to John Ford. Ford's influence on these hippies is just stunning. The commune seems to be working. The men and women who are giving it their all in order to carve out an independent life for themselves look like the American pioneers of the past. There had been an earlier scene in Arizona where they stop and visit a farmer and his Hispanic wife, and Wyatt passes good judgment on them because they're independent. And the commune is also seeking to be independent. Two of the commune women have a sort of triad marriage with the hitchhiking guy. Then they turn their attention to Wyatt and Billy. It seems an example of the commune's idealistic free love. Wyatt and Billy are even invited to stay and live at the commune, but they're too cynical or too driven in their quest to accept. Or is it that they're compelled forward into the South by all the money in the gas tank? Later, the pair are thrown in jail in New Mexico for parading without a permit. There, they befriend lawyer George Hansen, played by Jack Nicholson, who's in the jail drunk tank. George Hansen helps them get out and decides to travel with them to New Orleans. As they camp that night, Wyatt and Billy introduce George to marijuana. Jack Nicholson this is his breakthrough in his Hollywood career in this part. He'd been in Hollywood since 1958, 10 years, without making much of a splash. Nicholson had actually been terrific as Billy Spear in Monty Hellman's psychedelic western The Shooting, 1966. I really recommend that film, and boy, is he evil in that film. But by 1968, he was thinking of giving up acting entirely. He'd had better success as a screenwriter, for instance, for the psychedelic movie The Trip in 1967. Nicholson's role as George Hansen in Easy Rider was his breakthrough role, earning him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. In George Hansen, we see his Jack persona emerging fully formed, a smirking, slow-talking, cynical, enigmatic nonconformist. Nicholson, has used that same character in 20 films since, not least as Jake Gittes in the award-winning Chinatown, 1974. It's the same character. The real Jack Nicholson didn't need any introduction to marijuana or to LSD either. For Easy Rider, he was actually taking a 2-week break from being the screenwriter for the new psychedelic epic Head, starring the Monkees, American TV imitators of the Beatles' adventures in A Hard Day's Night. So he's actually on a break from his screenwriting job to have this part in the movie. So, stopping at a small town in Louisiana, Wyatt, Billy, and George are in a diner and attract the attention of some teenage girls, but are taunted and insulted as dirty hippies by the local men. The trio leave and camp outside town, but that night the locals attack them, beating them with clubs. Wild Billy, Dennis Hopper, shrieking and brandishing a knife, scares them off, but George Hansen has been bludgeoned to death. Nevertheless, Wyatt and Billy continue to New Orleans and find a brothel George Hansen had recommended. Taking prostitutes Karen and Mary with them, they wander through the Mardi Gras celebrations and ending up at a cemetery where they ingest a tab of LSD that Wyatt had been given at the commune. In this scene, Peter Fonda really did take LSD, and Hopper manages as director to get him to sit down and recount his horror at his mother's suicide when he was 10. She slit her throat in the bathroom. And his anger at her and at his father, Henry Fonda, who went on stage on Broadway that night in the comedy Mr. Roberts as if nothing had happened. Peter Fonda even now says that this scene was too painful for him to watch, too personal. It was Hopper who got it out of him, and it's certainly terrific. At this point, I have to say that however socially subversive in many ways Easy Rider was intended to be and is, its attitude towards women is totally retrograde. Women are only minor characters in the film, with barely speaking parts, and every single woman at the commune, at the diner, and in New Orleans is a sex object. Easy Rider therefore exemplifies, especially because the depictions of women in the film are unconscious, really exemplifies this important downside to the counterculture. Later at the campsite, after leaving Mardi Gras, Billy happily proclaims, "We've done it, we're rich, we're retiring to Florida. That's what it's all about, man. You go for the big money and you're free." But Wyatt sadly replies, "We blew it." Wyatt's declaration, "We blew it," has become famous. It's opaque. It's not really clear what he means. It's very Henry Fonda-ish. Dennis Hopper, as the director, didn't think it was clear himself. He screamed at Fonda, "Be more specific," but Fonda refused. Hopper later thought Wyatt meant that modern Americans had blown their heritage of freedom. That's what he meant by "we blew it." But Peter Fonda himself now stresses something else. Within the story of the film, he says, "We blew it when we went for the easy money, the easy ride, and thought we could retire." Easy riders, greed, exploiting a fat American continent. It's Jack Nicholson's character who had put the two aspects of this together earlier. Quote, "Talking about freedom and being free, that's two different things. I mean, it's really hard to be really free when you're bought and sold in the marketplace." That's why the townspeople, the bought townspeople, hate the bikers. They have sold out, bought and sold in the marketplace. I think that statement should make all of us pretty successful people uncomfortable. But I also suspect that lots of us old counterculture folks actually did find a way to resolve the dilemma. And we could discuss this after the lecture. So the next morning, Wyatt and Billy are on a country road when they're shot at by two local men in a pickup truck. Billy crashes. Wyatt rides back, finding Billy on the ground covered in blood. Wyatt rides for help down the road towards the pickup, and the passenger in the truck fires the shotgun again. We see Wyatt's riderless motorcycle fly through the air, crash to the ground, and burst into flames. Wyatt is dead. Captain America is dead. Engulfed in flames is all that drug money, too, secreted in the gas tank. That's how the film ends. William F. Buckley, the founder of the right-wing National Review, declared that this was the first time in a long time he'd seen a film with a happy ending. Yes, it's a joke, but also an indication of the bitter cultural divide in the country in 1969, a divide that still exists, as we saw yesterday. Peter Fonda's father said, "It's unclear to me what the movie is about," and predicted financial disaster. That also shows the generational divide. Bob Dylan, by contrast, loved the film and rightly predicted it would be a huge hit with youth audiences. But he didn't like it that Wyatt and Billy got so victimized at the end. Neither did Dennis Hopper's 6-year-old daughter, Maren, who was allowed to be present during a showing of The Rough Cut. She was horrified by the ending. "Daddy, they killed you," she wept. So I'm now going to talk about how this movie came to be. As we said, movies are works of art, but simultaneously they are financial investments. That's the complicated thing about movies. So let's follow the money. It's an interesting story. The general investment background is the youth market. At first, the youth market was dominated by low-rent American International Pictures, AIP. At first, AOP specialized in juvenile delinquency movies, sci-fi monster movies, and beach party movies. I'm sure people remember beach party movies. As youth culture changed, though, AIP turned to films about biker gangs and acid heads. Peter Fonda, in that period, it's 1966-67, became AIP's major star. He was already a star when they made Easy Rider. It was Peter Fonda who had top-lined AIP's two blockbusters, the bike film The Wild Angels, 1966, and then The Trip, 1967, written by Jack Nicholson. Wild Angels cost $350,000 and brought in $5 million at the box office, 15 times the original investment. The Trip, made in just 3 weeks for only $100,000 and released during 1967's Summer of Love, brought in $6 million. That is 60 times the original investment. So, however rooted in cowboy legends and in John Ford's The Searchers, Peter Fonda's stone vision in that Montreal hotel room in June '67 was a project that would combine the two recent AIP blockbuster successes into one, an acid-laced motorcycle movie. Who could refuse such a project? Well, American International Pictures did. The AIP executives loved Peter Fonda, but didn't like the heroes being dealers in hard drugs, that is, cocaine. And they really wouldn't accept Dennis Hopper as the director. Hopper, like Jack Nicholson, had been around Hollywood for years, but only as a minor figure. He'd never directed a film before and had a reputation, correct reputation, for being very difficult on the set. AIP was not going to invest money in him. This was the biggest financial mistake American International Pictures ever made. After many other rejections, in late '67, Fonda and Hopper did get financing from an independent production company, Raybert Productions. Raybert was the mastermind behind the TV sitcom The Monkees. Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider, the heads of Raybert, were in their early 30s, a generation younger than most studio heads, including those at AIP. The investment they put up was not large, $400,000. But Easy Rider was the best investment Rafelson and Schneider ever made. They persuaded big-time Columbia Pictures to handle the marketing and distribution. That is, they're an independent production company. They are going to make a deal with Columbia not to produce the film, but to distribute it and market it. And that's how Hollywood was dealing with things in the '60s. So they would present the finished film to Columbia, and then Columbia would market it and distribute it for a share of profits. Why did Columbia go along with this? It helped that Bert Schneider's father was a top executive at Columbia. Who you know in Hollywood is really, really important, and who's your relative. Now, the return on the $400,000 was $30 million at the box office in the first year and $60 million in 2 years. By the terms of the contract, Rayfielson and Schneider got a third of the net take, and so did Fonda, and so did Hopper. In other words, $10 million each. All got very rich. In purchasing power, it was the equivalent of $90 million today. $10 million was the equivalent of $90 million today. So this film made everybody very rich. Now I want to talk about the production, which is an epic in itself. The filming of Easy Rider began as a total disaster, bearing out all of American International's doubts about the project and about Dennis Hopper. That's a famous story. What happened was that Peter Fonda, as the rookie producer, he was not only the star, he was the producer, he made a rookie mistake. He thought that the Mardi Gras Festival in New Orleans was in March, but the Mardi Gras Festival is in February. So the crucial Mardi Gras goal of Wyatt and Billy in the film, which appears late in the film, had to be shot first in an emergency mode in New Orleans. Oh my God, it's in February, not March. We have to get down there and film it. With emergency prep, no preparations really, a crew gathered at the last minute in LA, and substandard equipment, 16 millimeter cameras instead of the usual 35 millimeter, and without a script. The screenwriter, Terry Southern, simply hadn't gotten that far when this emergency came up. He only had ideas. Well, talk about a baptism in fire for a rookie director. And Hopper, fueled by methamphetamines, that is speed, had ferocious arguments with everyone during this emergency filming in New Orleans. At one point, he got into a fist fight with one of the cameramen over a proposed shot, and he went crashing through a hotel door into the next room, where Peter Fonda was in bed with the actresses Toni Basil and Karen Black. What was produced in that week in New Orleans of frantic work was muddy and primitive. It found its way into the finished film only as a foggy acid trip. That's how they actually were handling it in part. When they got back to Hollywood after this, Fonda himself wanted Hopper fired. But Rayburn Productions kept Hopper on, had some faith in him, and now provided him, which he hadn't had before, with a professional crew, real 35 millimeter camera equipment instead of the 16 millimeter, and a terrific cinematographer in Laszlo Kovacs. Laszlo Kovacs was a refugee from the Soviet suppression of the 1956 Hungarian Revolution. He was attracted to Easy Rider because the theme of the movie was freedom. He would go on to have a distinguished career in Hollywood, 70 films, including 5 Easy Pieces, Shampoo, and unfortunately, Ghostbusters. And so they started over, taking 4 weeks to actually scout locations in Arizona and New Mexico before starting to do anything, to get agreements for the use of these locations before shooting the film. New Orleans had taught Hopper that careful preparations for shooting was not square, that it was something that you actually had to do, even though it imposed some restraints on the truly creative. The scene in the hippie commune was planned to be filmed at the real New Buffalo commune in New Mexico. But angry locals had firebombed the commune, had firebombed the main commune building in spring of '68. So that was out. The main building had been burned to the ground. It's another example of the bitter cultural divisions that were now evolving. So instead, a hippie commune had to be built in the mountains above LA and populated by hired Hollywood extras dressed as hippies. It sure looks real. It never occurred to me that this sequence wasn't filmed at a real hippie commune. But that was Hopper's and Kovacs' talents at work. After the scouting of the sites for filming, the majority of Easy Rider was then shot on location in sequence on the road in the following 7 weeks. The movie makers floated along on a cloud of marijuana. But what's also important is that the principal photography for Easy Rider was done during what seemed like the collapse of American culture and politics. First, the Communist Tet Offensive in Vietnam in February 1968. Then Lyndon Johnson's announcement in March 68 that he would not run for re-election as president. Then the assassination of Martin Luther King on April 4th, 68. Then Robert Kennedy's assassination in June 1968. That's when, right after that, the principal photography ended. Editorial work with the mass of film they had occurred during the savage police attacks on peace demonstrators at Chicago Democratic Party convention in August 68, and ended with the election in November 68 of Richard Nixon. And always there was the war. More American soldiers were killed in Vietnam in May 68 at the height of filming than during the Tet Offensive. None of this crisis escaped the filmmakers. That is, Easy Rider was filmed at a moment when the optimism of the counterculture that it could change things, which we saw so movingly in Monterey Pop, was collapsing in the face of violence in all directions. American society itself seemed on the verge of collapse. The film's dark mood reflects this period. I mean, it was really filmed in the midst of catastrophe. Now to the discussion of post-production. Dennis Hopper claims that the film is totally his from beginning to end. No, I'm afraid he's exaggerating. And more than exaggerating, he's actually, in terms of editing, lying. Efficient Hollywood directors edit in the camera. They know what they want, they get it down fast, and that makes post-production film editing and sound editing go quickly. John Ford was famous for this. He rarely had extra film. He filmed what he wanted, and that was it. But Hopper was a rookie. And so he photographed and photographed and photographed far, far too much material, 80 hours worth. And he didn't want to let go of any of it. He loved all of it. It took Hopper 22 weeks of editing during summer and fall of 1968 to produce a version of Easy Rider that was 4 hours long, with, to be sure, an intermission set in the middle. Well, Columbia Pictures was not going to undertake to distribute a 4 hours long biker movie. At that point, now we're talking about October or so of 68, editing was taken completely out of Hopper's hands, and a group of professional editors were called in to edit the material down to a releasable film. But the current version is 96 minutes. The professionals were themselves young long hairs, so it's not surprising that the editing built on the frenetic cutting of Richard Lester in A Hard Day's Night and the cinema verite of Pennebaker's Monterey Pop. Hopper was totally infuriated that the editing was taken out of his hands, but he was exhausted and let it go. And the result is certainly a reasonably paced movie as opposed to the behemoth that Hopper wanted. Now, in any film, music lends powerful feelings to the film's visuals. Music greatly increases the ability of filmmakers to evoke and control the emotions of the audience. And evoking emotions is the purpose of film. Now, most films in the 60s used a specially commissioned score by a professional cinema music composer, Elmer Bernstein, for instance. And that's still true today. But for Easy Rider's soundtrack, Dennis Hopper did something revolutionary. He used already existing contemporary rock and roll recordings instead of a specially commissioned score. Music from Steppenwolf, the band, the Byrds, Jimi Hendrix. Hopper had been obsessively listening to this found music while he was editing, using two songs especially. I Wasn't Born to Follow by the Byrds, which is a wonderful song, even though it's only 2.5 minutes, and Born to Be Wild by Steppenwolf, the original motorcycle song. He did this to establish mood as he was editing. He thought the contemporary songs made the movie really flow and gave it huge street cred. And so he made a pioneering kind of soundtrack. In 1968, no one had ever scored a major movie, a fictional narrative, with found music this way. A friend of Hopper's joked, "What a great idea, making a movie about your record collection." It also turned out, and I come back to finances because finances is important, that because no one had ever scored a major movie this way, using a song in a movie was still legally considered the same as playing it on the radio. That is, it was free. Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper did need to get the permission of the artists, and given the counterculture, the artists were happy to agree, but they did it for free, according to Hopper, or according to Fonda, for a mere $1,000 each. It's amazing. The score, essentially, for the film was free, just picked up off the radio. Amazing story, which, needless to say, did not last long. The lawyers got involved. And by the time of the filming, for instance, of George Lucas's American Graffiti in 1973, which again has lots of contemporary music, the studio was paying upwards of $100,000 for use of these songs. But there's another aspect of Hopper's enthusiasm for rock and roll, and especially for the great rock and roll band, the Byrds. Hopper was a great friend of David Crosby of the Byrds. Crosby was himself a Hollywood prince, like Peter Fonda. I don't think people know this, but he was the son of Floyd Crosby, the Academy Award-winning cinematographer of High Noon. Hopper was often at Crosby's house. People who knew them say that Hopper in Easy Rider, Hopper's Billy, is totally copied from David Crosby's look and mannerisms, from the handlebar mustache and fringed buckskin jacket to the knife in the boot. The story is also that David Crosby furnished the dope for the movie. But if you look at pictures of David Crosby from 1968 and you look at Dennis Hopper in the movie, you will see it is the same person. So the film was finally done and edited down to a reasonable length, and then shown to the executives at Columbia Pictures for distribution and marketing. And they did not know what to do with this movie. They were all older men, older and men. At first, they were just going to dump Easy Rider into the drive-ins. It might soon have disappeared. If you remember, I talked a little bit about what happened with Bonnie and Clyde in the first week. We're talking about A Hard Day's Night, how The Hard Day's Night was distributed in first-rate movie theaters, but Bonnie and Clyde originally was also going to be just dumped in the drive-ins. And so the film, as finished by the independent company, had a hostile distributor. A special showing of the finished film to the Columbia executives left them silent. But then the elderly president of Columbia Pictures, Leo Jaffe, stood up and announced, "I don't know what the fuck this is, but I do know it's going to make us a fuck of a lot of money." That was what saved the film, the Leo Jaffe. Immediately, every executive at Columbia loved the film. And the Columbia Marketing Department and Distribution Network got going. As a result, Easy Rider opened not in drive-ins, but in one of the best first-run theaters in New York City. Crowds of the young and hip lined up around the block to see it. And in 1 week, in that one New York City theater, one theater in one city, Easy Rider earned back its initial cost. Leo Jaffe and Bob Dylan had been right. And so Columbia Pictures took it nationwide. Once they saw the experiment that had been hugely successful in New York, they took it nationwide, opening it in dozens and dozens of theaters. And meanwhile, Dennis Hopper won a special award at the prestigious Cannes Film Festival for Best Picture by a New Director. In fact, in 1969, Easy Rider turned out to be Columbia's most financially successful film. Peter Fonda wrote with satisfaction, "A story I had put together 2 years earlier in the hotel room in Montreal had made it to the world screen, basically in the form and basically in the substance I had originally dreamed of. That was just amazing. How could anyone say that?" Easy Rider's financial success made Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper, as I've said, rich. They each had signed a contract for 10% each of the net profits, which in the end totaled $30 million. So there were three people involved, Raybert, Hopper, and Fonda, and they each got 10% of the net profits. That is $10 million each. That is $90 billion in purchasing power today. And if some of the dialogue already seemed cliche when it came out, well, that's how people really talked in those days, man. It's authentic, if only because the filmmakers were often so stoned while making the film that they could only be authentic. Those were no fake joints they were smoking on screen. Easy Rider's theme is the clash between liberated souls such as Wyatt and Billy and a society that looks with increasing hostility on nonconformists. This theme still has relevance today, but it's the opposite of the optimism in Monterey Pop, or for that matter, in A Hard Day's Night. It reflects the traumas of the terrible spring and summer of 1968. Today, Easy Rider can be viewed as merely an artifact of the period in which it was made. For those who haven't lived through the 60s, like your grandchildren, simply introduce them to Easy Rider as well as Monterey Pop, and they'll get an idea of what was going on. There's also the pleasure in the film of seeing early Jack Nicholson, early Peter Fonda, and early Dennis Hopper. Were they all ever that young? So it's a culturally important film. But as always, follow the money. The impact of the financial success of Easy Rider in 68, 69 had a powerful impact on Hollywood and on who could make movies. As one historian has said, the children of Dylan were now in control. When a cheap, non-mainstream film succeeds on the scale that Easy Rider did, it inspires other work. The lure of the profits made by both Raybert and Columbia Pictures, especially compared to the small initial investment, fueled an urge among studios to finance personal films that could be done on low budgets and budgets low enough to risk dealing with subjects of little or no interest to conventional Hollywood. Who knew which new project would be the next Easy Rider? Out of that period comes everything subversive, from MASH, made for $3 million, grossing 81 millions, that is 27 times the initial investment, or Midnight Cowboy, or Billy Jack, made for $800,000, grossing 32 million, that is more than 32 times investment. And Raybert Productions' own great Five Easy Pieces with Jack Nicholson, made for $1.5 million, grossing 18 million. And The Last Picture Show with the great Ben Johnson, made for 1.3 million, grossing 29 million. So these are huge investment wins. And finally, Roman Polanski's Chinatown, again with Jack Nicholson, made for 6 million, grossing 30 million. Or Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver, made for 2 million, grossing 30 million. This too was the revolution. I just want to add, it didn't last. That is, in 1975, you get Steven Spielberg's Jaws, which made $450 million for 9 million, and then Star Wars made for $11 million, which grossed almost $800 million. That's a scale beyond these numbers. These numbers were themselves fantastic, but this was a scale beyond that. And the result was that Hollywood returned to mainstream big productions and actually sequences of the same movie over and over again. But that's another story. The thing I would say about this is here we are with Easy Rider. We really are looking at a picture from a revolution. And a revolution lasts for 7 or 8 years and produces an enormous amount of super work. Okay, so let's stop there. I'll take a look at the chat and come back in 5 or 6 minutes, and then we can discuss. Okay.
Smoking grass and disobeying the norms, and I figured we'd just be wiped out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that happened to New Buffalo Commune, where they were originally going to film. I mean,
and I was, we were we were looking at different communes and things like that to join, and we ended up not ever doing that. But it just followed my life too much.
Yeah. How did it?
I didn't have a motorcycle though.
No. Did you ever ride on one?
Oh yes.
Yeah, me too.
Yes.
Yeah, really scary.
Yeah.
In itself.
I loved it. I thought it was great. My mother was horrified when I told her.
Oh, that you were riding a motorcycle?
Yeah.
What did she say?
She just said that, no, I don't do that. Don't do that. And I rode from Philadelphia down to the Jersey Shore and enjoyed every minute of it.
I used to ride when the Nimitz Freeway was a 2-decker freeway.
Mhm.
I used to ride south on the high second deck and go around. There's a big curve that there was there, and when I think about it now, I go, "Oh my God, that was crazy." But I do think one of the things the film is talking about is the hostility that had developed a year or so after Monterey Pop towards the counterculture. And I think James Green, you had an experience with that.
Are you referring to my story about the Who concert?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think it was the Who Magic Bus Tour, and that was their album before Tommy.
Uh-huh.
And they put on a show at the Santa Monica Civic in Los Angeles that we went to, me and 3 of my friends. The one who could drive had very long hair. The other 3 of us were sort of normal looking high school students at the time. But the show was at 10. After the show, we stopped at Denny's on the way home, and it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and we walked in and they wouldn't serve us because of my friend's long hair. They were very explicit about that. You can't be in here with hair like that. And we left, obviously. We had no choice. But I tell you, that's a story we've told a bunch, and we've lived with that for a long time. We then saw the Who at the Who concert that night. They broke all of their equipment. They smashed their guitars. They kicked it just like the Monterey Pop scene. And, we had a little high school band at the time, so we were pretty shocked, surprised by that. We knew that wasn't for us because we could not afford to buy a second guitar, but it was pretty thrilling, actually. So, yeah.
Yeah. As with Bonita's mother and the motorcycle, my mother was also astounded and appalled that I would buy a guitar. She said, "Out, wasted money. That's just wasted."
Oh, wow.
My experience also with this was even in Big Sur, and this was also in spring '68. Uh, I was hitchhiking up the coast. You know, again, something crazy that I certainly would not do now. And but I passed a cafe in Big Sur that had a sign that said "No dogs or hippies allowed." So what Bonita is talking about hostility, and which the film is talking about, uh, and which William F. Buckley was joking about, was something that was actually real. And so it's worth asking, where did that hostility come from? Why would people care about length of hair? Why would they care, especially since hippies weren't doing anybody any harm? That at least it seemed that way. Why would people be so hostile?
I don't know,
Hmm.
because it was like anti no, the norm,
Anti
the norm.
anti norm, yeah. Um,
It was a threat to other people.
yeah, it's weird. I also had the experience of overhearing somebody saying they all look the same, and to me, they everybody looked different with long hair. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, nobody looked like anybody else.
My mother was deathly afraid of Timothy Leary. That was her reason for objecting to everything.
Uh, I've got some stories. I have my wife has some stories about Leary. Maybe but I'll save that for next week for Berkeley in the '60s. He was involved in that too. But I think Katie, it looked like you were going to say something.
Yeah, I think remember what a big deal the Beatles' hair was.
Yeah.
The length of their hair, it just was something very different that society had never experienced. I had some animosity, experienced some animosity. I was in a hippie van going across from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco in
Hmm.
71, and we picked up hitchhikers along the way. And I got the same kind of thrill watching Easy Rider now. Is just every day we didn't know where we'd end up or who we'd be with, or it
Yeah.
was just total freedom. And in Utah, we stopped at a gas station to go to the bathroom, and it had a restaurant. And the guy I was with went into the men's room, and he came out and asked the station attendant for some soap. He said, "There isn't any soap in the men's room." And the guy said, "Well, what do you want soap for, you dirty hippie?"
Yeah.
And we went in the restaurant and they wouldn't serve us.
Huh.
But we either spent the night at the side of the road in the van with whoever we picked up that day, or a lot of times we picked up a hitchhiker that we would take them to their place, to their commune, to their home. And we stayed in 5 different communes, and each one was so different.
How were they different?
Um, the guy we picked up had run away from home. He was very young. He was, I don't know, 15, 14 or 15. And he had built his shack, and raccoons came in every night and stole his food.
Oh, gee.
And he was just on the edge. There was another, I think it was Wheeler Ranch, that the organizer had gotten an inheritance, and he deeded the land to God, and everybody could stay there for free.
Mm.
And people built their own houses, and that was very organized. They had one guy, a postmaster, who would go into the town every week to get the mail. And they had a store that if anybody had anything they didn't want, they put in the store and somebody else would take it. There was nothing, monetary. It was all free. They had common dinners that they would have everybody bring food or take turns cooking. There was a woman that we met at one of them called Lucy Horton, and she was hitchhiking all around the country by herself, doing a cookbook of
Huh.
recipes from communes.
Huh.
I always wondered whatever happened to that and didn't think much of it. And then many years later, 30, 40 years later, I was in Ohio and helping a friend move, and there was a box of books, and the top book was, I think it was called Communes Cookbook or something like that by Lucy Horton.
There it is.
So just by pure coincidence, I
Huh.
found her book. So she had followed through. But to think about, a single woman hitchhiking all across the country for months and months at a time is unimaginable these days, certainly.
The one thing to remember is that in 1971, the total population of the US was 200 million, as opposed to today, 340 million.
Right.
It was much emptier.
Oh, they were wide open spaces.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a fascinating kind of thing. Yeah. I mean, all of these places, I mean, what strikes me as you're describing them, Katie, is that they're really pretty inoffensive. So it comes back again. Where was the hostility coming from? The long hair was still an Edwardian thing up until 1914. People had long hair.
Mm,
What changed to short hair was so that men could wear helmets in
for
the
war.
forces for the war.
Oh, geez.
That was true in World War II as well, of course. But the returning to that style was actually a kind of retrograde, going back to 19th century. I mean, you can see it in the photographs of men from the 19th century. They're really hairy as hell. And that was romantic. That was thought of as romantic. And I think the long hair had to do with that romantic as opposed to soldierly kind of look. But it's certainly striking that it would create such antagonism.
Yeah.
That happened to me too. I remember that. I was in Las Vegas, which was probably the wrong place to have long hair. So I think that it has to also do, it's easy to sit back as a historian and say, well, this was actually a return to the past. I'm sure it did not feel that way to the people who were hostile. It was a sign of rebellion primarily. There are two questions that really that people put on the chat. One, and this is a question we can ask everybody: which character art do you identify with in the film? And I certainly identified with Wyatt, which tells you that I can be a judgmental person.
Yeah.
Well, I did not identify with Billy. Billy really struck me as undependable
Yeah.
and pretty crazy. But it's worth asking, who did you identify in the film? With? Did any of you identify with anybody in the film?
Yeah, I identified with Wyatt as well. He's kind of, we've had a lot of these brooding actors in various roles in Hollywood. James Dean was the first one that I can remember right now. But
Right.
there's some thoughts behind their facade, and you really want to know who they are inside. What's going on inside? I just love that.
Um, I think there's certainly the brooding actor part, and maybe there was a way in which Peter Fonda was imitating James Dean as well as Henry Fonda as the Wyatt character. I think Shelley, you wanted to no? Um, I think it'd be very interesting. Practically nobody, it seems like, did anybody identify with Billy?
No, as a female, I didn't find myself identifying with men. There weren't very good female roles there. To me, it was just the whole sort of aura of what was going on.
Uh, and what's interesting about that is there aren't any female roles in the
No.
film, and they're just sex objects, and yet there were women who were hitchhiking around the country doing projects and doing it pretty safely. So in a way, the film downplays uh, the actual situation that women had, made it worse. It was bad. I know it was bad,
Yeah.
but it made it worse. Uh, what made it bad was that the pressure was on to say yes all the time, to show you were hip by saying yes. So that was going on. Susan,
Are you going to talk some about Jack Nicholson's incredible performance in that film?
yeah.
I was absolutely stopped cold. I just couldn't believe what I was watching. I was absolutely mesmerized. It foresaw Cuckoo's Nest, and
Yeah.
that one segment was all I saw of the film. It just absolutely gripped me. It was such a remarkable performance. Does anybody else agree with that?
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I certainly do. It was magical to see
Nick,
that.
Nick, Nick.
What was it that struck folks as
I couldn't put my finger on when we're going to try to go back and find it.
uh,
Oh,
Persuade,
his
persuade my
smile, for
husband
one
with the
thing.
remote to locate it so I can watch it again. To me, it just was such a precursor of all of his later roles, but I'm not sure that was even it. It just to me, it was just an actor at his very best talking to me.
it
Not
was
what he was
seemed
saying, but the way he did it.
it seems real. I mean,
Very real.
actors
To
that
me, it was just so completely immersive.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I can
I'm
really
an admirer of his anyway, but I guess I just hadn't been talked to by him in quite that way before.
what do you think it is that I mean there's a kind of charisma
Yeah,
certain actors have.
Mhm.
but
Um,
they don't always have it. To me,
ah, that's also true. Yeah.
this was a vignette. It was just, I mean, I like Jack Nicholson a lot. Of course, I've seen a lot of his work, but there was something about that particular scene and the close-up of him, and the photography with his eyes so intense, and the
Right.
close-up of his face that was just to me transporting. It didn't much matter what he was saying, I guess. It was his aura that was so
Well,
beautifully captured.
this brings us to I mean, what he does say is, and it's very uh, powerful now. It's
Yes,
easy to talk about freedom.
exactly.
He says, but being free and talking about freedom are two different things.
Yeah, well, that was part of what got to me too, of course, but it was the way he said it.
And also, I mean, the action that Hansen makes and just going off with these guys,
Yeah,
right?
and getting himself killed.
Yeah. Well, that's the terrifying part, and
Yeah.
that's the negative part. Um, uh, but I think it's Lou was asking, what did it mean?
That me?
Yeah. What did it mean when Wyatt says we blew it? what did that mean? I want to actually go back to talk about freedom and being free. Uh, I certainly had a privileged life as a university professor, and especially after tenure, I could research what I wanted and read what I wanted and teach what I wanted. And especially because I won a lot of teaching awards, nobody was going to say no in my department to what I did. But I think, and so I was free. I had a life that was basically free to do exactly what I wanted to do. But I think that's not true of most people. I understand how privileged that was to be able to do that. Did people? Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, I just want to go back to the Jack Nicholson idea of that role because it showed like he was really down and out. I mean, he was kind of crazy, but he was one of the good old boys
Yeah,
in that community. And so he gets a pass. Now, if either of those boys had shown up, Dennis
yeah.
and Billy, if they had shown up drunk and needed to get into they would have been, it could not be treated the same way. And it was a critique of, I thought that was a skillful critique of the inability of the society to accept the difference, changes, possibilities, new ways of being. And we saw it in the South, of course, with racism and everything. It was clear, but that was powerful to me.
I mean, I argue with my wife, who probably will show up next week, to tell her story about nasty Timothy Leary. That I argue with her that the Cultural Revolution really was pretty successful. Of course, it really originated in the civil rights movement, and the tactics originated in the civil rights movement, but that the Cultural Revolution, up until
Recently.
24 anyway, was pretty successful.
Which is?
Say that again. Uh-oh.
Somebody said something. It was a woman.
Yeah. Somebody was, I think, saying no, it wasn't.
It should unmute.
I don't know. Yes, I think it was Shelley. You're on mute.
Yes,
There-
someone muted me. I didn't. I was just saying something like good point or something like that. So I'm sorry.
Okay. So, but you were, I mean, I think that despite the initial resistance, which could only be expected given how radical the changes were that people were doing, over time, I thought it was actually the cultural part was pretty successful. The political part was not, but although, you know, we helped end the Vietnam War. The Vietnamese will say we did it, but you helped. And so I think even politically it was pretty successful. Although then you get Reagan and Bush, and really then Bush too, and Clinton himself was actually pretty conservative in many ways, even though he played a guitar, played an electric.
Sax.
Yeah, and the sax, he played the saxophone.
Actually, I do have finish what you're saying. I did have one little comment.
Okay. Wait, say that again, Shelley.
I did have one little comment, but
Okay,
finish
go ahead. Go ahead.
You know what struck me is that it's true that the depiction of these people who, you know, hate the hippies and so forth and don't want to serve them and they know that they're threatened, is, you know, what are these people doing to them? Nothing.
Yes, right.
But it seemed to me that having this gratuitous killing at the end by these yahoos, actually, I've noticed over the years that although it's become politically incorrect to be to stereotype almost anybody except Southern men. Southern
Yes.
men are consistently shown, you know, they don't show the lawyers at Galatoire's eating turtle. What they show is, you know, people who with their dogs and their rifles and so forth. And you remember Obama made some comment about people in Western Pennsylvania with their rifles and their something or other, which got a lot of, I mean, anyway, the point is that the contempt of the more liberated and privileged people towards
Yeah.
these people who are not educated and so forth. I mean, that's part, I think, of the divide. And I think that this movie not just mythologizes the Easy Riders and the hippies, it also is mythologizing this contemptible, vicious, and ignorant underclass as well. And
Right.
so
And it's class, isn't it, Shelley? I mean,
class and the South.
yes, but yes, and it's the South, but in particular, it's a class contempt. It's contempt for certain class of people, economically straightened people, actually, not well off at all.
Yeah.
And in that sense, also Nicholson represents a different thing, right? He's a lawyer, so
Yeah.
he's from an upper class involved, and so he's okay. But and you can see this in lots and lots, actually, of westerns in the late '60s, of where the people who are real villains are these kinds of yahoos, and that's actually a class contempt, and that has lasted um,
Mm.
for a very long time.
I really do think that it is a class contempt, but it is, I think that its core or its, you know, magnet or something is Southern white men.
Yeah. It is Southern as well. It's regional, but uh,
Uh-huh.
but you know, if even if you look at Five Easy Pieces, the great Jack Nicholson movie from '71, I guess it is. Uh, yeah, he's a concert pianist who's given it up in order to work in an oil field in Bakersfield, and his best friend is a guy from Oklahoma. And when push comes to shove, Nicholson is contemptuous of him.
Mm-hmm.
And that this line he says, "What do the troubles of a cracker asshole have to do with my life?"
Yeah.
And although in the end he gets into a fist fight to try to protect him, that class differential is really there, and it's not just economic to think about it as regional. It's really cultural as well. It's
Oh,
not just
absolutely.
yeah. And um, I spent some time in Greensboro, North Carolina, and Greensboro itself was a sort of modern city. But if you went outside, it was really going back very, very far. I mean, on unair conditioned shacks, you know,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And this does have to do. I'm just this is a little bit off the subject, but it's something that happened in Greensboro itself, which of course was the site of the first sit-in. Um, what happened in terms of creating an integrated city was that there was a large factory that made blue jeans there, Cone Industries, C-O-N-E, actually Cohen. And in 1967, at the university, local university, old man Cone met with the sheriff and said, "This is now going to stop. because I can't get executives to come down here. And if you don't stop, I'm going to move the factory to some place where I can get efficient executives to work.
Oh.
And it stopped. And that's a different kind of class that you're looking at. That's really happened. I was in the room where it happened.
Wow.
So those were, so when you think about what changes occurred, partly the changes that are occurring have had to do with what finance was saying as well. But certainly culturally, I think people adapted and accepted lots of things. Although I could be, I mean, I thought the gay issue had been solved in San Francisco in 1972. What did I know? I mean, yeah, Susan.
Another comment we've left out of this whole discussion, the Vietnam War,
Yeah,
which was such an enormous player in this thing. I don't think we have time to go into it. I was married to a man when he came back from Vietnam, his second tour, the Tet Offensive. As an anti-war activist, they wanted him out of the army.
yeah.
Army officer, you weren't allowed to have longish hair and have views that weren't conforming. And I can remember early on, he had the recruiting command for Northern California, and he'd have to locate his offices upstairs because he got bricks through the windows. And
Yeah.
all of this ties into what we're talking about. I think that that's such an important factor that I don't have anything particular to say about it, except that I think it should be part of the discussion.
We will be discussing this actually a week after next,
Okay.
coming home. But that reminds me, in terms of one of the things that Jane Fonda was involved in was in 1970 and 71 were these GI coffee houses that were set up outside of bases where people could come and talk about what they felt about the war. And the most famous one is actually outside Fort Dix in New Jersey, and it was firebombed.
I don't doubt it.
Yeah, firebombed in January 1970. Yeah. So
Wow.
that again is part of the proto Civil War that was going on, and I mean the book I wrote about this said if the people I knew in Weather Underground actually saved the country by not going into doing lethal operations, that is, killing people. Because if they had done that, I mean, they killed themselves, they blew themselves up by it because they were incompetent bombers. But they didn't kill intentionally, they did not kill anybody. And if they had, it was very clear that Nixon was prepared to really really get close to civil war and really track down people and really go after them, so that their avoidance of violence. And I know the people who said we can't do that. So I said to them, "You're not going to like this, but you actually saved the country by backing off from that." So I think there was a level of violence, and the film reflects in that sense, that level of violence that really did exist, that was going on. Yeah, Douglas.
Yes, before we go, I wanted to, I included in the chat links to the first two lectures that we uploaded to the Ollie UCSC YouTube channel. If you can grab it from the chat, I will also follow up with an email to everyone in the class, telling them about the location of these lectures.
Right.
That's our Ollie YouTube channel where we upload most of the lectures that are recorded and agreed upon by the instructor. So They're great productions. Jim did one, I did one. Everything is there. So if you want to relive the first two classes, they're there. This one will be uploaded sometime this week or next week. That's all I wanted to say. I pitch for the Ollie UCSC YouTube channel.
Well, I guess we are closing, but I just wanted to say that the film really does confront the violence that the counterculture was facing. And I think it was pretty shocking to people that was suddenly happening. And that was a real thing. And I guess it's still a real thing in some ways, but although culturally it was pretty successful. Okay, so let's stop. And I'll see everybody next week. And it's Berkeley in the 60s. And this won't be so much about counterculture, but really about the real new left. So we'll be talking about that and its impact then.
Okay. Before you go, someone asked me if a person who is not an Ollie member can watch the videos, and the answer is yes. Please share this, spread the word. That's all we ask for.
Yeah.
So Shelley wanted to know, can people look at the video who is not an Ollie?
And that's what I just responded to. Yes, please spread the word, share the link
And
with
Bob
anyone.
says, I met Jack Nicholson in '75 and he was still smoking marijuana. I'm sure he's still smoking.
Art, thank you very much. Another fabulous presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Art. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Really good.
See everybody next week.
Yeah.
Bye, Holly.
Bye-bye.
Bye.